Welcome to another episode of the MacGuffin podcast, the movie review podcast that dreams are made of. Keith Foster, you are in San Diego, California.
Cassidy Robinson, you are recording from an undisclosed location in the Rocky Mountains.
And today we're going to be catching up with the second half of the Barbenheimer experience with Obi Homie. After that, we're also going to talk about, from Netflix, the movie They Cloned Tyrone, which didn't get a lot of press, but I was seeing a lot of positive stuff about it, and the cast was really cool, so I thought it was worth going back and looking at.
It also released, like,
in the middle
at
of everything.
time in the middle of summer when there was literally, like, every movie came out. I also saw I mean, we're not going to be talking about this on this episode, but I also saw Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And all I will say is, man, had they just, like, waited for, like, a November release, I do not think it would have struggled the way it did. But also they didn't know that they would be up against a fucking meme marketing.
Right, and two of the biggest movies of the year.
Yeah, which kind of came out of nowhere for, a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, a few episodes back, we did talk about the big blockbusters that are coming out and how there's been a lot of disappointments in the box office with very expensive movies. And we kind of guessed which ones may or may not do well. People can go back and listen to that. I believe that was our Indiana Jones episode, which also underperformed.
You know, it's a Mission Impossible movie. It's a crowd-pleasing action blockbuster. Had it come out at a different time during the year, I think it wouldn't be a question of its success. There's a decent chance that we might see Tom Cruise die on film.
Right. That's the ongoing joke. At this point, I think he's going to die of old age before he falls off an airplane.
I mean, I'm sure that they have those stunts so, like, fucking triple safety checked. Right. But you never know. Like, shit goes wrong sometimes. Apparently this last one, they filmed, like, the big gag stunt, the first thing, because Tom Cruise was like, in case it goes wrong, I don't want there to be a movie in the can that can't get released because we didn't get this stunt.
Right.
So they're just doing, like, the craziest shit first, and then, like, all the dialogue.
I think this will all culminate when Tom Cruise stars in an Evel Knievel biopic.
You just fucking broke my brain a little bit because, like, goddamn, how has that not happened? Like, that needs to happen. Holy shit.
For the streaming homework, we're also going to we're looking back at 1977 Slapshot, which you assigned from Netflix.
Uh-huh. We're going to talk about that for sure.
Yes. Before we get into the main reviews, I did want to do a little bit of an RIP. We had, in the last couple weeks, 3 pretty notable deaths. Starting with Paul Reubens, who most people know of as Pee Wee Herman. But he was a big comedic actor, big character actor. He was in a lot of stuff. He originally was a player in the sketch comedy group The Groundlings, where he developed the Pee Wee Herman character. And then after that became a television show and a movie, he went on from there. And he'd been in a lot of fun little roles where people might have not even known it was him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was, comedic genius, absolutely, literally influenced whoever your favorite comedian is right now, like they owe something to Paul Rubens. And he was thinking about his fans up till the very end. It's just gut-wrenching, absolutely heartbreaking.
Yes. So if obviously if you've never seen the Pee Wee Herman films or the TV show, seek those out. Especially the first one, the first Tim Burton feature, is notable. But he was also a lot of fun in the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. He played a really interesting, weird role in the movie Blow, where he plays a drug dealer.
He's one of those actors that literally like made everything he did better. Like just absolutely elevated whatever it was by 100%.
Yes, a mystery man, another fun character there. So,
do you watch What We Do in the Shadows?
Did he have a guest spot on that? The TV show?
So there was a this episode where they like talked to a vampiric council, and he reprised his role from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's brilliant.
The other person I wanted to give a shout out, one of three, who also passed away very young, Angus Cloud. He was one of the side characters in the show Euphoria.
Okay, I saw when his name popped up, but I'm not familiar with him. So, okay, Euphoria, that makes sense why I wouldn't know him.
He was found on casting call. He's not a trained actor.
Oh, damn.
I don't even think he was found on casting call, like, per se. Like, I don't think he, like, came in with a script or anything. I think they literally just found him, like, in the wild and was like, you're perfect for this role. So he was kind of doing a version of himself in that show. But in the show, he plays, like, a very young drug dealer with a heart of gold. And he
was like in his 20s, right?
Yeah, he's 23, I think.
Damn, way too young.
And he was a lot of people's favorite character. You always rooted for him because of the line of work he does in the show. He's always on is he going to survive this episode? We don't know. And everybody always pulls for him because they love his character so much.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. And, not for nothing. I mean, this is certainly the least of the tragedy that goes into his young passing. But I don't know what they're going to do with that show. I mean, they're losing people left and right, not always to death, but one of their main characters they've essentially wrote out of the show because she didn't get along with the director.
So it's the new Glee.
Yeah, pretty much, except for it happened in 3 seasons instead of like 4.
Sure. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like,
nobody
Glee.
liked that movie. What was that show, The Idol, that just came out? But by the same director, the same showrunner.
Yeah.
He's losing a lot of goodwill really fast. And, I don't know. I think the next season's probably going to be the last season. I'd be very surprised if they're able to pivot. But, I really liked his character a lot. He was just a magnetic presence on the screen. I was really excited to see him develop as an actor. He had a really interesting, very quiet, cool charisma that you don't see a lot. And, too soon.
Yeah, damn.
Too soon. And finally, director William Friedkin.
Huge loss.
One of the greats, one of the biggest voices to come out of the 70s New Hollywood. Most people are probably aware of him because he was the director of The Exorcist, but he's done many films and was making films pretty much till the end and making exciting work. Like, he wasn't one of those guys who sort of fell apart in the 90s or just started making maudlin children's movies or, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, he always pushed himself and was always doing challenging work.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. The Exorcist alone, I feel like gives you lifetime legend status. But like you said, he has directed so much more than that. And absolutely a visionary.
So just a small list. Right before The Exorcist, he had made The French Connection, which was also nominated for Best Picture. He made the movie Sorcerer. He made the movie Cruising with Al Pacino. To Live and Die in L.A., which is like the greatest Michael Mann movie that Michael Mann didn't direct. But it's really good. I mean, it's up there with Thief or Heat or what have you, in that kind of vein. He made the movie Bug.
That was
the movie version
much
of
later
Bug.
one, right?
Yeah, that was in 2006. And in 2011, with Matthew McConaughey, he made the movie Killer Joe.
Well, and that was kind of the beginning of the McConaissance, wasn't it?
Right in there, yeah. And both Bug and Killer Joe were written by Tracy Letts.
Tracy Letts, yeah. They were stage plays that he filmed, right?
Yeah, and which he one of his first motion pictures, he had made some documentary stuff and shorts and what have you beforehand, but was also based on a play, The Original Boys in the Band, which we did.
Yeah, we reviewed
the remake of
a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah, which was incredibly ahead of its time. I mean, that movie came out in like 1970 and was, you know, talking about stuff that people were not prepared for at that time.
No, and we might discuss a little bit of that in Slapshot.
Oh boy, we might. But let's go ahead and get into Oppenheimer. I know people are still catching up with it. I saw it on a Sunday afternoon. Not even a Sunday afternoon. I saw it a Sunday morning.
Well, it turned into afternoon by the time the movie was done.
Yes, that is true, which is probably why I was confused. But
did you get to see in glorious 70 millimeter?
No, I saw, but it was a pretty big screen, one of the larger ones. But it wasn't 70 mil. I know they've expanded the 70 millimeter IMAX version of it. But I mean, there was still a decent amount of people there for 11:30 on a Sunday.
Sure, especially
for 2 weeks after it was released.
Especially for, you know, a biopic,
right? A drama.
Yeah,
a historical
Cinema's
biopic.
Back, baby.
So go ahead and describe the ins and outs, the goings on of Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer is the drama of J. Robert Oppenheimer, spanning from his, you know, early years in college, academia, through the Manhattan projects and the development of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and culminating in the government bureaucracy to strip him of his security status from the United States government.
Yeah. I mean, that's the log line. And, you know, it's been interesting hearing some of the discourse around this movie because it's a historical event. So it's sort of designed like a thriller because that's what Christopher Nolan does. But it's a thriller where you know what happens at the end. So in a way, he sort of uses that old Hitchcockian adage of, if you want to create suspense in a scene, you show the audience the bomb underneath the table, but the characters don't know.
Yeah, and in this case, it's a literal bomb hanging from an oil rig, in
the middle of the desert. Yeah.
25 feet in the air. Yeah.
But it also covers a lot about his life, and specifically sort of the beginnings of the Red Scare and how that was played into how they would try and keep him from giving his advice or his insights into the future technology of nuclear.
Not just his influence regarding nuclear energy, but also his political career, completely cutting it off.
Right. At a time when this technology was feared to be spreading to other political or national allies and enemies across the globe.
If we're really going to get in the weeds of it, Oppenheimer had known social groups, communists, connectivity, and during the war, to defeat the Nazis, the race to beat the Nazis to the atomic bomb, that wasn't a big thing. Once the Nazis weren't in the picture anymore, and all of a sudden it was the race to see if the Soviets can catch up with us, then all of a sudden it was like, ooh, okay, maybe Oppenheimer should be completely blacklisted from everything ever.
Right. And, even during the time when he's building the bomb or assembling his team to build the bomb, or even during his time in academia, this history of being affiliated, however loosely or closely, with known communists and the Communist Party at the time, was always sort of hanging over his head, and it was a stick and carrot that the American government was able to use to intimidate him into playing by their rules.
Yes, yeah, and essentially, this is really what the movie is about. Like, I kind of expected the movie to be more about the bomb. But it is much more about his political leanings. And I mentioned the glorious 70 millimeter thing because, there is the sequence with the Trinity test, where they actually try the atomic bomb out. But for the most part, this movie is a lot of dudes in suits in offices talking.
Right. That's what it's more of a procedural thriller, or not even a procedural thriller so much as a like kind of white collar battle of the wits.
I just think it's interesting that they made the IMAX and the 70 millimeter such a selling point when that's maybe 10% of the actual movie.
It's as far as set pieces go, yeah. It's pretty light on action set pieces. It's and for a lot of people who are coming in to this looking for Christopher Nolan doing Christopher Nolan shit, they might be fairly underwhelmed by the lack of action in the movie. But I think it's a handsome movie. It looks good.
Oh, sure.
It's shot by Hoyt van Hoytema, who he's been working with at least since Interstellar, or maybe even before that. And, there's sequences that are in black and white. There's sequences that are in color.
No, it is very much a visual movie. I think it's interesting that so much of the marketing, besides the sort of viral Barbenheimer marketing,
Sure,
which they had no control over, a lot of the marketing sort of emphasized this, the visual language of the movie, where there is a lot of it that I don't think seeing it in 70 millimeter would make a difference. Um, and that's coming from seeing it in 70 millimeter. That isn't to say it wasn't shot well. Like it's still gorgeous. But I do think the majority of the movie is more closed in than I was sort of expecting it to be.
right. I mean, we had this conversation a little bit when we talked about the movie Air, which was another movie about guys in boardrooms talking and deliberating and staring at whiteboards or chalkboards and designing things.
There's a lot of chalkboard acting in this movie, but
sure. But I think you can see the difference between what Christopher Nolan does with those limited spaces and what Ben Affleck was doing in Air, where Ben Affleck, I think, was leaning on too much stylization or too many camera gimmicks to create a sense of action or kineticism. Whereas Christopher Nolan and his DP just have a much better sense of camera placement and lighting and creating a mood, and of course, editing. This movie lives and dies on its editing.
Okay, so you're jumping the gun a little bit for me here, because the visual composition of this movie is 1,000 times more interesting than something like Air, which is pretty boilerplate. I mean, like you said, it's stylized, but it feels shallow. Whereas this is like the shots are comprised to tell the story. Like everything is kind of feeding into itself. However, I do think this movie is edited within an inch of its life. It's a 3-hour long movie, and I felt like a solid 2.5 hours of it almost feel montagey to me.
Sure.
Yeah. It's very quickly paced. I think I think too much so. There are times when I just wanted to shake them and go, just let this be a scene. Just let this be a scene where the characters talk and it's about something, and you don't need to rely on tricky editing to make me care about this. Like there are literally every fucking character actor you can think of is in this movie, and they are all churning out great performances.
Not just character actors, stars.
I mean, stars and character actors.
There's a lot of star power. Yeah, there's a lot of characters in the movie, but and every time they introduce somebody new, you're like, oh, damn, okay, he's in this too.
But I wanted the editing to slow down for a minute and let the actors do some of the work, because it started to feel like every scene was cut to a log line, basically. Like it got to the point where it almost felt like a 3-hour long movie trailer. It's so quickly cut and so quickly edited. And there's this gorgeous score that's kind of constantly propulsing you forward. But I needed a break from that.
Yeah, no, I'm of two minds. I think there are moments where the movie's a little over-edited, especially earlier on in the movie. I think the movie has a drive and a pace to it that it sort of propels you into the story. I think he sort of knows that that a lot of people are not inherently interested in, especially the backstory of this character. They want to get to the bomb. So he has to create sort of momentum to get to that point. And he has to introduce so many players.
So many fucking players.
Yeah, and he's dealing in at least 3 different timelines. So, you could do that sequentially if you wanted to. You could tell the story in a linear structure. I actually think, most of the time this style of montage editing from him kind of annoys me. But in this case, I actually think it works more than it doesn't. And I think, especially because the character himself, who's played by Cillian Murphy, is working ahead of his own moral compass. Like he's putting everything, all of his sense and all of his political leanings and all of his work as an academic on the back burner to just get this project to completion. Like he's trying to sort of edit through his own moral compass to justify working on a project that's perhaps unjustifiable. And I think that the editing has a psychological effect to it, where in the case of something like Batman Begins or some of his other films that are sort of cut this way, or Tenet has more of a story reason for it. But I think in this case, it's more there for emotional complexity. And I think that it actually plays into scene work, in creating juxtapositions. The before, the during, and the after of this event are all sort of at a race to this inevitability, this kind of doomsday experiment. And I don't throw this out lightly. I think this is a great film. And I don't mean great in the sense of like, oh, I had a good time at the theater, or, I'm going to give it an A or something like that. And I mean, this is like a great piece of cinematic art. And I haven't thought that about a Christopher Nolan movie in a good while. And I think he's playing to his strengths. Now, there are, like I said, there are some times when the editing is a little, maybe it's just takes a bit of an adjustment period to kind of find the rhythm of the movie. But once I was there and I knew where sequentially we were in every sequence and what they were kind of leading up to, and he sort of drops in those narrative connecting beats. That's when I felt like, oh, okay, I'm in good hands. I know where this is going. I know what I'm supposed to be getting out of these quick cuts to before and after.
See, I think I'm gonna have to disagree with you on this one. To me, this felt like I was getting Dunkirk flashbacks. Just tell me the story, and I don't need the tricks. And I felt like this was a lot of tricks. This was a lot of trick editing, and I stepped back for a second and breathe, and I felt like I never really got there.
See, I felt like there was enough scene work in the movie to justify.
I absolutely think there was a ton of scene work. I just felt like I only got to see like the first 2 pages out of a 6-page scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent that has always been Christopher Nolan. Like,
I agree. And in
with
this
the exception of very few movies, I think you could argue Insomnia. I think you could argue The Dark Knight, and I think you could argue most of The Prestige. Those three, I think, are the most confident in long-form scene work. Whereas the rest of his movies, I think he makes up for maybe what he lacks as a emotional storyteller in creating tension through construction of the movie, through form.
But that's what's frustrating to me is I don't think he is lacking there. I think he knows how to direct a scene. I think he is confident in that, and maybe not confident, but he knows what he's doing. He always casts these fantastic actors and
lets them hurt.
And lets them do their thing, right? And the camera it feels like the camera is just there a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But it feels like this sort of trick editing is like a crutch almost, especially in this movie to me. I was actually kind of frustrated by it for a lot of the movie. I felt like the black and white sequences were the most actual movie I got.
Yeah, I just didn't have that problem with this. I was prepared for that. I was expecting, especially early on in the movie when we already kind of get an idea of the structure, and there's this kind of frames within frames, right? Because he's being interrogated further into the future after the point of the drop. And then there's another interrogation sequence when they're just checking his background and in getting his security clearances together. And those two interviews frame different sequences in different ways.
I do think that Christopher Nolan is fantastic at building tension. Like ultimately this is the movie's like climax is about whether or not he's going to get a security clearance, which is not an earth-shaking event to anybody. I mean, sure, it can be, but you know what I mean? It's not a life or death thing, but he treats it like a life or death thing, and that tension comes through absolutely. And I do think that is what his style is great at, is building towards these tense moments.
Now, for me, the movie doesn't work in two places. And I think, unfortunately for him, a lot of the times he treats romantic interests in a movie as an ingredient in his stew to try and create the illusion of emotional storytelling, but it never, I never believe it in his movies. Like, I could care less about his tryst with Florence Pugh. Some of the scene work with Emily Blunt as his wife is good, but it doesn't read as a marriage. They talk together in a scene just as in the same way as when he's in a scene with Matt Damon or Robert Downey Jr. or whoever.
So to me, this is a prime example of a victim of the editing, because I feel like as an actor,
and nothing against those actresses.
No. Yeah,
they're both doing good work. I think his approach is just so cold that.
Well, and as a character, I feel like Cillian Murphy just has more chemistry with Florence Pugh, and the way that romance is sort of resolved, and the way Emily Blunt is introduced, it's awkward. It's jarring.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of feels like he felt like including it to bridge certain different parts of his life and to sort of underline.
Well, it felt like
where he was at different points. Like he was, he was with Pugh when he was flirting with these radicals in in the Communist Party, and
she's a more radical character, so it's literally like he's flirting with this idea of destabilization.
right,
He's seduced by it, but ultimately, like, that's the problem, is those scenes work only as metaphor and
right.
not as actual.
And that's what I mean as by cold, is his approach to women in movies most of the time, or specifically as love interests, not always as characters, but definitely as love interests, is he always treats them more as an idea than as a person.
Yes.
Like they're always there to.
But in this one, Emily Blunt's an alcoholic, so
right.
Character.
And she's good in the movie. You know, I don't have any
she's
problem.
Fine. It's just, so surface level.
Right. And they don't totally justify their addition to the runtime.
Yeah. I agree with you there completely.
But there's some really cool performances in here. I mean, Robert Downey Jr., this is some of his best work we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, it is nice to see him, like, do a serious movie and take it seriously. Like,
right.
he earned all this goodwill with Iron Man, and now that he's post MCU, like, this is the shit I want to see him doing.
Right, especially as he's getting older. Jason Clarke is really good in this movie. Sadfi, Ben Sadfi.
Oh, yeah.
He plays
he kind of
really
comes out
fun
of
role.
nowhere.
Yeah. I mean,
Alden Ehrenreich, who was also great. I think was also probably the best part of Cocaine Bear. He's having a good year.
He's having a very good year. And we get Alden Ehrenreich and Dane DeHaan in the same movie. If we can get Alden Ehrenreich, Dane DeHaan, and Leonardo DiCaprio in the same movie, then we'll,
it's like a handsome Harvard boy explosion.
Right. Well, I mean, Ehrenreich and Dane DeHaan were both compared to young Leos.
I can see Dane DeHaan more than Ehrenreich, but okay. I mean, I'm here for it. I like all of them as actors. Yes, it's a smorgasbord of incredible performances. Matt Damon, I don't think is standout, but he is serving. He's doing what you want Matt Damon to do.
I think I think he borderline overacts in this movie.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm not going to disagree with you.
There's times when he's doing just fine, and then there's sometimes when I feel like he's not in the same movie as everybody else. Like everyone's kind of playing to the tone, and for some reason, I don't know if he was harder to direct it for Nolan or what, but he comes in like doing this really big performance, and I don't know if maybe he's trying to make a point out of like military American exceptionalism or something. I don't know. Like I think he's a little arch in the movie.
But I almost think that works for his character, so I'm gonna defend it. Also, shout outs to David Krumholtz and Josh Hartnett, who we have not seen either of them in a minute, and they are both fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, welcome additions to the movie. Yeah. They were some of those ones, and Dalmatian.
David Dastmalchian.
Yeah, who was in Suicide Squad, and he was in the Dark Knight, which is probably how he has his Nolan connection. Mm-hmm. Usually very small, quirky character actor, but in this he gets a lot to chew on. In scenes where there's just wall to wall character actors, and the camera gets to focus on him a couple times.
Fucking Rami Malek, Casey Affleck, like we could literally go on all day naming all of the fucking incredible actors that are in this movie.
Right, and there's some like one scene wonders in here, and there's some who are there during very key sequences and stretches of the movie. Mostly it's a three-hander between Cillian Murphy, Matt Damon, and Robert Downey Jr. They are the ones who are holding it down, but within that there are incredible performances in and out of this movie all the way through. It's a who's who. And in that, it never feels like too much. Everyone feels like they're there to serve the movie. With the exception of Matt Damon, I think, who's a little big in the role.
But for his character, I think that works. I think like you need this sort of imposing figure that I liked Matt Damon in the part. But yeah, exactly. It doesn't feel like stunt casty. It's not like, oh, here's another cameo. Here's another cameo. It's like they're all just these incredible actors who get, maybe a minute or two within a 3-hour movie to shine. And then when they get their moment, they take it and it fucking works.
Yeah, I wonder what if there was a big discrepancy between the shooting script and the script that the actors got. You hear these stories sometimes where, like in the case of The Thin Red Line, there's I forget who it was, but there's a character in The Thin Red Line who's a pretty small character who, when he took the role, he was the main character. And the movie changed so much between what they shot and what they edited that he ended up being like not even 20 minutes of the movie, and he went in thinking he was the main actor of the movie.
Sure. I mean, that happens all the time. Or you hear about, someone who's cast as like a small part, and then they write the part to be bigger because it's like you just want to hold on to that.
Well, that's happening on set, though. I mean, at least those people who know.
Sure,
I'm talking about, I think it might have been Adrian Brody, who went to the premiere and then sat there and was like, I'm not in this movie. I thought I was the star.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Like he was in it, but it wasn't in it as much as he thought he was. Like they totally restructured based on the footage they shot.
Well,
because
and
that's how Terrence Malick
but that
works.
brings me back to my frustration about Oppenheimer as a movie is I felt like there was a lot of that. I felt like every scene I was like, I want to see, like, I feel like all of the meat of this scene was just sort of cut down to a minute-long segment versus actually like trusting it to be a full scene.
Yeah, I mean, The Thin Red Line, I think, is a brilliant film. I mean, regardless of how it came together, I think that's a work of art. And in a similar way, I think this is I got a similar feel to it. I mean, they're not similar movies, but if I learned that the shooting script and the script that the actors had were wildly different, I would think that they still made the right choices.
I absolutely think that the shooting script and the written script, or what we got in the end product, are very different, I think. And I don't know. I felt like this one left me a little cold. I actually felt like, to me, it felt like a lot of the things that frustrate me about Christopher Nolan movies.
And I think it's probably the best film of the year so far.
Oh, shit. Okay. All right.
Yeah, this is the one to beat for me. And I mean, I went in like 3 hours. Okay, let's do this. And there were even points in the movie where I was like kind of waiting for the movie, and then once we get to the end and we get to the meaning of it all or whatever, I was like, oh, this is actually like exceptional. Like this, I witnessed something today.
See, I wanted that. I wanted that so bad, and I wonder if it's just a difference of expectations. But I wanted that like devastation. I wanted all of that, and by the end of it, I was like, yeah, that was fine. Like I felt like it was solid. I don't think it's a bad movie by any means. But I don't know. To me, I fully recognize that I probably need to see it again because I wonder how much of it was based off of expectations, but it kind of disappointed me.
See, I've been kind of hot and cold with Christopher Nolan for a while, so at this point, I have no reason to believe that I'm going to get excellence every time I see him. So even if I'm always there to see what he does, because even when he fails, he's at least failing in an interesting way.
Yeah, he is one of the few directors that I think I will go to a movie based on his name alone. Even like I'm not necessarily expecting to be blown out of the water, but I know it's going to be good, but some are much better than others for sure.
Well, there's ones that I like more than others. Yeah. And I would even say, like, as much as I am glowing about Oppenheimer, this isn't one I'm going to go back to a lot. Like, it's kind of a lot of work. But like some of the best films out there, you know, in the realm of like a 2001 or a Tree of Life or what have you.
Yeah, you're not just going to throw it on a Sunday afternoon, and that doesn't indicate a good or a bad movie. Like there's plenty of dumb shit that I'll throw on just for fun, knowing that it's dumb shit, but like I know what
it's not a comfort movie.
No.
But I do think that it is an exceptional piece of work. And what I appreciate about Christopher Nolan, and we've talked a lot about him before, but what I appreciate about him is even though he's his only competition, I mean, I guess with the exception of Barbie,
but that's different. But yes,
but you know, he's really only competing with himself every time he goes out to make a movie. He's still pushing himself, and he's still trying, he's still challenging himself, and he's pushing the form. And he's not resting on his laurels and
I agree with that completely.
Making the Micronauts movie or something.
And that's why every time he has something, I'm gonna turn out for it. It's just like you said, he's competing with himself, and to me, this left me feeling a little.
You felt like you were watching a person conducting an experiment.
Yeah, I felt similarly to this as I did when I saw Interstellar, and as I did when I saw Dunkirk. I'm like, yeah, this is good. Like, again, it's not a bad movie, but for me, a lot of it didn't work the way I wanted it to.
See, this is the type of movie, and they don't do this anymore. I'm dating myself now, but this is the type of movie that in like 1997, they would, let's say Oppenheimer was made the way it was made in 1977. And then in every so many years, they would on network television be like, we are going to show Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer in a 3-night special. Get out your VCR and you try and record it, and like it feels like one of those kind of movies. Like I'm and maybe I'm drunk on it. I don't know. Maybe like 10 years from now I'm gonna recant this opinion, but I feel like this is a once in a generation kind of thing. It's like, it's like in the world of like Apocalypse Now and things like that.
See, I wanted that. I wanted that viewing experience, and when I left the theater, it was like, sure, it was a Christopher Nolan movie. Like, I don't know. It like I said, it left me kind of cold. But
let's grade it. Let's grade it. I'm gonna give it an A-, despite all the nice things I said. Specifically because the Florence Pugh and Emily Blunt stuff doesn't really work for me. But otherwise, I think it's exceptional.
I'm giving it a B. Solid B.
And for you, that's like an F. Because you don't give anything.
No.
You always
a C- or a D is an F. To be a B is like, yeah, this was good. Like, and I fully admit that I probably need to see it again. But I to me, this is not Nolan's best work. And yeah, like you said, for you, this is the movie to beat this year. That is not the case for me. I was like, yeah, sure, this is good. I don't know. But yeah, I'm giving it a B.
All right. Well, we'll move on to our second movie of the week, and this is the Netflix original film They Cloned Tyrone, which is sort of a sci-fi comedy about a man named Fontaine, played by John Boyega, who lives in sort of a rough neighborhood, is dealing in different kind of low-level street crime, drugs, weapons, etc. But he's getting by. He has a younger brother that he's trying to take care of. He has a troubled mother who won't leave the bedroom, and he sort of sees this world around him of sort of economic disparity and decay. And one day he gets in an accident or an altercation where he believes he's been shot until he wakes up, much like you would during a nightmare, and he continues on with his life as usual until he starts to notice more and more strange occurrences to lead him to believe that the world that he lives in is not as it seems. He runs into Jamie Foxx as a pimp named Slick, and Teyonah Parris as a prostitute named Yo-Yo. And they kind of become a sort of threesome in the movie, and they are trying to sort of Nancy Drew their way through this situation in what ultimately sort of feels like, it's a very post Get Out. I think it's very difficult not to think of this movie in that context. Mm-hmm. But more specifically, kind of reminded me of the movie Sorry to Bother You.
Sure, yeah.
By way of They Live.
Well, I was going to say, I think this is sort of like Boots Riley by way of Paul Verhoeven.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of satire, a lot of stylistic choices, a lot of commentary about society that is done sort of like peripherally. So, there's like scenes where there's like a commercial on in the background, and the commercial is very satirical and biting commentary that by the end gets fully explained, and I'm maybe jumping ahead a little bit here, but that was kind of my biggest problem with the movie, was like I loved the vibe of like the first two acts, and then I feel like the third act is just like a little too, it wraps everything up in too nice of a package, and I didn't need or want that. I think I would have liked it to end a little more open-ended, and I think that would have played to what the movie was actually building towards, instead of this, the resolution feels very studio notes to me. But yeah, but I'm also trying not to judge the movie too harshly based off of that. There's plenty of movies that I have enjoyed that kind of fall apart in the third act. I mean, on a vibes level, I loved this movie.
Well, I mean, I think it's effective mostly at all the things it's trying to do, and it's genre blending. It's very funny as a comedy. Jamie Foxx is hilarious.
He's
and the chemistry,
giving a career best performance in this. Like, he's so good.
Yeah, him and Tyrone Paris have really great chemistry, really great comedic chemistry, especially.
And it was really fun to see Tyrone Paris outside of the like Miss Marvel sort of stoic black superhero role, and to actually get to play a character, because she's really fucking good in this.
Yeah, am I wrong, or was she in? Yeah, she was in Dear White People.
Oh, the series or the movie?
The movie.
I have seen neither.
Okay, she was in a very serious movie in If Beale Street Could Talk, as well as Candyman, but the most recent Candyman reimagining.
See, I know her from Candyman and from WandaVision, and she'll be in the upcoming the Marvels, but it was fun to see her get to play a character,
and a big comedic performance as well. And I mean, she gets to do more comedy in Dear White People, but in that one, she's kind of playing a sort of like self-hating college girl who wants to fit in with the white girls.
Okay.
And so that's a little bit more constricted in her choices as a character. Sure. Whereas this, she really gets to just throw it all out there and be really big.
She also, I think, has to do a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the exposition goes. Like, she's sort of the character that kind of figures out what's happening and is sort of explaining it. But she gets to do it in very funny ways. And I'm just saying that to speak to her quality as an actor, because that type of role is often not very forgiving. But she has this charisma that is able to sort of carry this exposition dump dialogue in really good, fun, interesting ways.
Well, and the dialogue is good enough.
Yeah.
And
the characters are interesting and distinct, and there's a lot of high sci-fi horror concepts going on here, but they focus on the characters' experience of that.
Yeah.
That it never feels like you're just sort of drowning in concept.
There's definitely a meta postmodern take on the genre. It's poking fun at all of those things. And I mean, even They Live, which to me this movie just feels a whole lot like.
Sure, absolutely.
In even down to certain sequences and certain set pieces and set design. I was reminded a lot of
absolutely. Like the chicken restaurant specifically. And yeah, there's a few sequences. I know what you're talking about.
Well, and the way it treats pop culture and the sort of conspiratorial nature of the plot, and the way it kind of blends camp and comedy with genre all at the same time. Like, yeah, I had a lot of fun with the movie. To me, this is like the exact kind of thing you want to flip on Netflix and watch just out of pure curiosity because you like the thumbnail or whatever. You want to see the new Jamie Foxx thing or whatever. And then you come away with being like, wow, that was actually like way better than I thought it was going to be.
It was actually a solid little sci-fi thriller.
Yeah.
Well, and it's directed so it's directed well enough too that it can sell these sci-fi concepts without getting bogged down in that. Like it because how many, especially lately, how many times have we seen a thumbnail for some sci-fi concept movie and it's just drivel where the conceit takes the center stage. But what I like about this is it's letting these characters interact with what if these sci-fi concepts were real, and it gives it more of a life than some of that other junk. No, I agree with you.
Yeah, it doesn't feel boilerplate, and it doesn't feel... I mean, there's definitely a point of view here, and it belongs sort of in a world of interesting African-American or Black genre that's happening right now. And like I said, in a very post-Get Out world. And you could you could put Sorry to Bother You in that lane as well. And I think this movie, definitely, if you like either of those movies, this movie should be appealing to you. Mm-hmm. John Boyega, this is a very different kind of role for him, or at least from what I've seen.
Great.
You would not believe for a minute he's British. Like,
he's British? Oh fuck! I had no idea. No, he's absolutely great in this. If you know him primarily from like the Star Wars, which is probably what a lot of people know him from. It is refreshing to see him take on a character with a little more grit and a little more complexity.
Right.
And I like the way that they take these characters that could be very arch and very two-dimensional, but they're written with enough life and they give the actors enough room to explore them that they become way more interesting than I think they probably were on the page.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty arch, I would say.
But what I'm saying is, like, when you have the right actors, that can work.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's playing to the comedy. I mean, it's tonally appropriate. And there's a lot of funny concepts in this, and there's an emotional reality to it too. There's a political point of view for sure.
Well, and also, like, on top of all of that,
it works as satire.
I really dug the just the art design and the set design and stuff. Like, it feels sort of like quasi sci-fi, but grounded in a way that you wouldn't have gotten in like the 80s or 90s. I just think like a lot of like the costumes and stuff were really cool and understated, but also like, it's still read as this sort of nondescript sci-fi futurism.
Yeah, I also like the visual language of the movie in general. I think, the cityscapes and the neighborhoods look very lived in and real, and and probably a lot of it is. I would assume that a good amount of the movie is not a set, except for when it's obviously a set.
Yeah.
But it's that juxtaposition that's a lot of fun, as you get this very worn down environment,
very urbanized,
and then juxtapose that with this kind of sleek sci-fi thing that's happening at the same time. So yeah, I think this is a fun movie. I had a good time with it. I give it a B plus. It's not gonna like change your life. It's not as, the satire is not quite as sharp as those others that I compared it to, but it's right up there. It's pretty good.
No, I agree with that assessment completely. I think, if I have to criticize anything, I think it maybe a little over long. I think this, probably could have been a nice 90-minute thriller. Yeah. And the third act, I start to see the seams a lot more. And it felt a little too resolved for me.
Yeah, there's a place towards this end of the second act where I was feeling the momentum kind of like gear down instead of just leading us to a natural conclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it kind of takes a little bit to kind of get back to that point again.
This is exactly what I'm talking about, that I think could have been streamlined a little bit more for story reasons versus whatever ends up happening. But I do think it's a fun, competent little sci-fi thriller. I agree. B+ was my grade as well.
All right. Let's go ahead and talk about Slapshot. And go ahead and give us the deets.
So a smaller hockey franchise is falling apart in a rural factory town, and they can't get the sort of town and crowd support. So after rumors about the dissolution of the franchise start bandying about, Paul Newman, who is a player and the head coach on the team, decides that he is going to try and hustle his way into a sell for the team. So he decides to kind of let the hockey rules go, and the team sort of transforms into this menacing goon squad that starts winning games just based off of sheer brute force and spectacle. And through this sort of not giving a fuck, the town starts rallying behind them, and the audience attendance that wasn't there starts showing up. And
they start winning games and getting notoriety. And so this is a pretty well-known movie. I mean, especially in terms of hockey movies, this is one of the first big ones. This is directed by George Roy Hill, who also made Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting, The World According to Garp. He was a big director. And this is in sort of a interesting period of like film history, because we're slowly drifting out of like the nihilism of early 70s filmmaking into that sort of like post-Rocky, post-Jaws, feel-good entertainment movies. But there's still remnants or artifacts from that early 70s, especially in the way these characters are written and sort of the situations they're going through.
Well, I also think that comedy is interesting at this time,
Sure.
because this is before. This might sound more critical than I mean it, but this is before jokes are as prevalent in movie structure, in sort of screenwriting structure, right? Like a lot of the humor is supposed to come from these sort of situational aspects. This isn't like Airplane, where if a comedy wasn't a full-on spoof, they don't have like a joke per page kind of ratio the way that comedy would eventually take place in the 80s and 90s. So it's also
this is a year before Animal House, and
yeah, but even Animal House, like if you show Animal House to an audience now who is familiar with comedy now, I would see them probably being pretty unimpressed and not thinking it's that funny, because it's not structured the same way, right?
It's not written for punchlines.
Exactly. And comedies wouldn't really be written that way, again, outside of just pure farcical joke machines like Airplane, which are literally just set up delivery machines. I could see showing this to somebody and them not finding it funny at all. In fact, I don't know how funny I found this movie.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying there. I think.
Well, it also suffers from a lot of things, right? Like, we're viewing this. I've never seen this movie before. And so I'm viewing it from, a lens of 2023 who, like, I get that in the 70s, like, gay slurs were not a thing. But now when you hear them, it's like a chalkboard on nails, and it really sticks out. And to hear certain slurs, once in a while is one thing, but the sexual politics of this movie are pretty fucked besides that.
Yes, I came into that issue as well, especially early on when they're introducing the characters with. I guess this is like one of those movies where, at a point in time, had more F-bombs than previous movies. Like, this is when people started like counting how many times it comes up. Like,
here's the thing, in 20, I mean, shit, even if we watched Superbad now, right? Like,
we would stuff that doesn't hold up.
We would probably look back at some stuff and be like, ooh. So I get that there is a cultural context that we're not going to understand. Even if we put that aspect aside, like, I really hate to be the guy who complains about a comedy, but like, that really seems to be the comedic engine of this movie, is let's laugh at how badly these people can behave, and the humor seems to come from the faux pas, right? It comes from these people who like, they're hockey players, they're this sort of rough and tumble blue collar dudes. I get that, but to point the finger and be like, well, it's so funny because they're saying these things that we can't say, is like pretty shitty.
No, I mean, I agree. I think you can get away with writing morally compromised characters.
Sure.
As long as you don't feel like the film is morally compromised. As long as you feel like the perspective of the filmmakers and writers are not the same as the characters, and they're not
Yes.
selling their behavior as aspirational or cool, then you can get away with, really dark,
Absolutely.
hard to relate to characters. The problem with this movie is it's part of that whole thing, and I would include a lot of the National Lampoon's movies into the 80s. And it doesn't really start changing until mid 80s, and even then there's remnants of that go on. But it's that boys will be boys.
Yes.
Sort of Playboy magazine style humor that just doesn't super hold up anymore. Or maybe it does for some people, but certainly not for me.
Well, I bet it like if I had grown up with this movie, yeah, I could probably gloss over a lot of the gross stuff, because as far as the 70s go, there were way grosser comedies. You know what I mean?
Probably.
And I think that's what stood out to me about it, is like, it didn't feel like the stuff that I found gross was what they were pushing for shock value. It felt like, well, that's just what dudes talked like in the 70s, and I didn't like it.
Right. I mean, so there's that. I don't want to dwell on just that aspect of it, but it is certainly a hurdle to get over if you're viewing this with 2023 vision and you're relatively young and progressive or whatever. It's just going to feel dated. My bigger problems with the movie, besides that, is I never really got a sense of stakes in this movie. Like, I never really understood, like, where the narrative tension was. Like, I understood they wanted to sell the team to Florida. I understood that, they were trying to pull off this marketing gimmick to get more notoriety so that they could have a bigger sale. And I understood that the themes of the movie of, like, comparing this ragtag group of hockey players who are hanging on by a thread to this factory town that's losing everything. Yeah. I feel like that definitely could have been pushed more.
And there are some interesting moments with that as a story, but okay, so
I don't think the movie's as interested in it as I am.
Yes,
I mean, exactly. I think that it's there. Well, but I don't, and one could say that's what the movie's about, and I think that is what it's about when it's all said and done. But I don't think that in the middle of the movie, when they're on their tour, mm-hmm. and they're racking up wins, and he's like making these phone calls back home, the Paul Newman character, and he's like, "Hey, we're doing really well. Did you see us on this? Did you see?" I'm like, "No, I didn't. I didn't see any of that. I couldn't, if you didn't tell me right now, I would not get the sense that this team is winning or doing much better or I didn't feel like there was really an arc to these characters."
Do you want to know what my theory is the problem with this movie? And this is pure conjecture. But right. I think, to me, the problem is Paul Newman. Right? Like, he's a big star in the 70s. He is definitely, his star is descending. But
right, he was already older when he made this movie. His big work was like in the 50s and 60s.
But he is still a big name, and you can even see it on the poster that you have.
They're selling it with him.
Yeah, it's Paul Newman in Slapshot.
Yeah, it's him and a bunch of young character actors.
And his character isn't that interesting. He's kind of this old hustler who's like, on his way out of his career. I feel like if the movie had focused more on Michael Ontkeen's character, Ned, who was always, I think, more of the moral voice of this movie. He, throughout the whole thing, he's like, I don't want to be playing this goon hockey. I'm not going to just fight people. I want to play hockey for hockey's sake. I feel like all of the dramatic tension is with his character, right? Like, this franchise is going in a direction that he doesn't like. He wants to play, the sort of pure version of the sport, but his obsession with the sport is causing him to ruin his relationship with his wife. Like, all of the juice is there, but he is just sort of forced into this background role. My favorite part of the movie is the crux of the climax of the movie, because it's him finally sort of shaking off this devotion to hockey, seeing like, all right, if this is what sells, if this is the spectacle, I'm going to become a part of the spectacle. And it I think also makes some of the sexual politics a little less icky. I really enjoyed the last 15 minutes of the movie, because I felt like this was, okay, they're actually saying something here.
Well, that was the only game that felt like
something happened.
A moment in the movie where there was some dramatic stakes happening. Everywhere else, when they're having these, basically, and if you want to talk about editing, it's just like these scenes of these guys slamming into each other, punching each other out, the audience going nuts. Then we cut to the announcer guy, and there's some, not great comedic bits going on there. And then they're on the bus again, and I'm like, and then
we're cutting
that just kind of happens.
Paul Newman trying to get his ex-wife back, and again, talk about a movie that should have been 90 minutes. There is so much of Paul Newman sort of running around fucking hustling people that should have fucking cut from this movie,
or at the very least been more interesting. And I think you could even have the juxtaposition between Michael Onkeen as this
absolutely, yes, yeah,
as this young idealistic player versus Paul Newman, who's like this grizzled old goat who just wants to get out and get out on top. I think if they'd created dramatic tension between them through the story, I mean, there's 1,000 different ways you could do this movie better.
Also, I think there's 1,000 different sports movies who have done this better. Like, honestly, I think in this movie is probably just as dated as far as humor goes. But if you look at Major League, about this ragtag baseball team that sort of has to come together to try and save the franchise, like, that's a basic sports movie formula. It's great, right? And you get that a little bit more with Charlie Sheen as this young wild rookie, and Tom Berenger as the grizzled vet. I feel like that dynamic feels a little bit more earned in movies post Slapshot.
Right. I mean,
but this movie feels like it's
there's something very similar in Bull Durham.
There's something similar in Caddyshack. Even 5 years later, I think just the way the comedy dynamic had shifted, I feel like you would have gotten those things a lot more. I get that, probably like our parents' generation probably thought this was like the funniest thing ever. But
it was so rowdy, and it was so
and that holds up. It's still very rowdy.
Right. I mean, right. And I think there was sort of an appreciation of its raucous tone.
I'm not saying the movie was trying to be progressive, because it clearly wasn't, but it was trying to be transgressive, right? And so it was trying to push boundaries. And because of that, I think the politics of it are, like, I bet that people who were fans of this movie, if they watched it today, would probably be shocked at how much those slur words are thrown around and things like that, because it feels very rebellious. It feels very
irreverent.
It feels very like fuck the man, fuck the system, and there is inherently a progressivism within rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely has a post-60s baby boomer quality to it, as does all the movies of the 70s. That's what made 70s movies.
Sure.
There's some weird growing pains, I think, going on in this movie between the films of like William Friedkin, like something like French Connection, which had racist characters as their leads, but you don't watch that movie and feel that it's a racist film.
Yes.
Whereas this movie, you're never quite sure if the film's in on the joke or not.
Totally.
But you can absolutely feel the influence that this movie had on like the films of Adam Sandler, the Happy Madison crew,
100%.
The Broken Lizard crew.
Well, I mean, just look at The Water Boy or Happy Gilmore. Like,
sure,
you know what I mean. And again, that kind of
basically any hockey movie. I mean,
well, any sports movie that's like this team is too ragtag, and I think you can even see the influence with stuff like
Mighty Ducks.
Oh God, what's his name? Judd Apatow, and even like Danny McBride and Eastbound and Down and stuff. Like you can see the evolution of it, and
they grew up on this. This is part of their DNA.
But I also think that it is something that needed to evolve.
Yeah, I mean,
comedy could not have stayed like this for very long. And
I do think there's interesting stuff here, especially anthropologically. Mm-hmm. I just don't love it as a movie. I just don't think it's that entertaining. I don't think it's that funny. And I'm not just because of the quote unquote offensive stuff. I have pretty thick skin. I can deal.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't think it's always trying to be a comedy. I think there is actual dramatic beats, but the movie isn't like super selling those either. So I don't know. Like for me, it doesn't hold up. But
no, I agree completely. I think pretty much every sports movie that I've seen that has been influenced by this movie has done what this wants to do, but better. It wasn't that funny, and it wasn't that... And again, another movie that was a half hour too long. Like, this should have been a fucking 90-minute comedy. It just feels like tonally...
That didn't super exist yet.
Well, so, there's a reason why we want it. This movie definitely wears out its welcome. By the end of it, I was like, okay, another hockey fight. Like, okay.
Well, I would be fine with all of that as long as I knew or liked any of these characters. And, for as many people are in this movie, I feel like I don't get to know hardly any of them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'll give the movie some flowers just for being the one of the first and like its place in overall sports movie history.
Sure. Yeah.
And trying to thematically do some interesting ish stuff. But I if you've never seen this movie and you're, let's say, 45 years or younger, I don't think you're going to get a lot out of it. And I like older movies. Like, I think there's terrific comedies from the 50s and 60s and even the 30s, like Howard Hawks comedies and stuff like that. I would rather watch, something as tightly scripted and performed as like His Girl Friday or like Funny Girl or...
Sure. Yeah.
Whatever. Like, pick your poison. I'd rather watch Pillow Talk than this movie.
I agree. It ultimately is just kind of an ugly, chaotic movie that that just gave me a little bit of a headache. I did enjoy the Hanson brothers. I thought they were a lot of fun. I didn't like how the other characters treated them. But there was this sort of earnestness to their characters that made them stand out. I also think it's worth mentioning that this is like my sole knowledge of this movie before I saw it. The guy who was like the captain of the Syracuse team at the end, the one that gets like the bounty put on his head, McCracken or whatever. The way he looks was the visual inspiration for Wolverine as a character in the X-Men comics. That is like my sole knowledge of this movie previous was, oh, this is the movie where Wolverine came out of, kind of. So in my head, like, that is kind of how I picture Wolverine should look in like on screen, because he's just this like squat little hairy fucking asshole. Especially Wolverine in this time in the comics. I just thought that was a fun little bit of trivia.
So the next episode we're going to have a guest on, and they've selected our homework. We'll be watching the movie Ghost Dog, Way of the Samurai from 1999, and that's available to watch on HBO Max. And if anybody has to say anything about any of the topics we talked about or any of the movies that we reviewed on this episode, you can reach out to us at our email at MacGuffinPod@gmail.com. You can find us on social media, and what are we on? We're on everything. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We have a Letterboxd. We have a TikTok. We're on YouTube. I just uploaded our last episode. Like, if you want to watch the full episode as a YouTube link, you can. I also put in timestamps if you just want to watch certain reviews or certain segments. You can be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and a 1-sentence review on whatever podcast app you use to listen to us. And you can read my reviews that I do for the Idaho State Journal by looking up Idaho State Journal Arts and Entertainment page. And you can follow me individually on Twitter and Instagram at VC Cassidy. And be sure to read the other reviews and articles by the rest of the MacGuffin staff at MacGuff.in.
You can also follow me on Twitter, not X, Twitter, because it's going to be Twitter forever. Elon Musk can go fuck himself. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Keith Foster Kid. Also, if you're interested in seeing me perform live, come check out my show, Improv versus Stand-Up, at Mockingbird Improv.
And that'll be it.
Are you saying that there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Bye.